In the next few movies, we're going to be exploring a fascinating new feature inside of Photoshop CS5, which is called HDR toning. And here in this movie, I simply want to introduce you to the topic. In the next movie, we'll explore how we can use this in even more creative ways. All right, well, for starters, one of the things you almost always want to do when you're working with HDR toning is you want to duplicate your file. And the reason is that when you're working with this, you have to flatten your image. In other words, you can only have a document with one layer, which in turn doesn't give us a lot of flexibility. So in order to add flexibility to this process, we're going to choose Image, and then we'll select Duplicate. This will then give us the ability to duplicate our file so that we have two versions of the same exact document. This is also really helpful because we can use this as a way to compare and contrast how we're going to modify this photograph. Well, the next step, of course, is to navigate to our image pull-down menu. Then we're going to select Adjustments and travel all the way down to HDR toning. Click on that option and it will open up our HDR toning dialog. Well, in order to get familiar with this, you'll notice that this is organized in an interesting way. It starts out with presets, and then we have the ability to control our edge glow, tone and detail, color, and we can also modify a toning curve. Another thing that's interesting is that we can also open and close these different areas of this dialog if we don't want to work on all of those areas. Well, our preference most likely will be to have those open, but I just want to point that out in case one of those areas was inadvertently closed to show you how you can bring it back. All right, well, let's start off by working on our edge glow. Well, what you'll soon discover is that as you increase your radius, you'll also want to modify the strength, and that these sliders will work together. That a certain strength will work well at one radius, where it may not work at a different type of a radius, or it may give a different type of an effect. So again, what we're going to need to do is to work with these sliders together in order to create a distinct or unique look. As we make our way down to tone and detail, what we can do is we can either brighten that or we can also darken that up a bit. Exposure is going to give us an overall increase or decrease of the exposure so we can find just the right sweet spot. Detail will bring out a lot of those little teeny kind of glowing details that are so typical in HDR type of looks. Well, here then we can control our gamma, which will also affect the amount of detail. The strength too. That affects how much detail we're bringing in and also our radius. And the whole reason I'm bringing this up is just to get you to realize that all of these controls work together. And what we want to do is use these together in order to create an aesthetic that we like. All right, well, here I'll go ahead and take a look at how we can work with our shadows a little bit, and then also those highlights, just modifying the overall brightness value of those highlights. And a lot of times what you're going to do is swing these sliders one way or another, again, just to try to find something that looks interesting to your eye. I'll go ahead and lower the saturation there. And what I'm going to do is try to find a look here which is a little bit more subtle, not quite so over the top. And I'll go ahead and bring this back there, and then bring my detail down a bit, and also control that exposure there. All right, now that's looking good. I think that's pretty nice. It's a pretty subtle aesthetic, yet it just adds a little bit of a snap to the photograph. Now, of course, how far you push this effect is completely up to you. You could go for something a little bit more intense, or you could scale these controls back to have something even a little bit more subtle. All right, well, either way, however you decide to dial this in, what you want to do next then is go ahead and click OK in order to apply this adjustment to your image. Next step, grab your Move tool, hold down the Shift key, and then click and drag and bring in the HDR toned image into your original document. Well, now here we can press the F key to go to full screen view mode, and what we want to do next is name this new layer HDR. And what's great about this is that it gives us flexibility. Say we don't like this effect, it's too strong, we'll simply lower the opacity and lower it till where you do like the effect, so that it's just giving a little bit of snap to this image. Let's zoom in a little bit so we can evaluate that. Here's that before and then after. All right, well, now that we've been introduced to the topic of HDR toning, and now that we have an HDR tone layer in our main document, let's experiment with how we can use this layer in some creative ways, and we'll do that in the next movie.